All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to Unclouded. This is where we navigate the data, AI, Web3, and the journey away from the confines of the centralized cloud. I'm going to be hosting today. My name is Carson. We do this just about every week, where we explore kind of new ways to shape how we store, think about, and harness data and information in our rapidly changing digital world. You can connect with us, the Unclouded community, via our Telegram channel and follow and engage with us on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. If you're into tech or you're an entrepreneur, you're kind of curious about this like data or AI-driven future we're clearly headed straight towards, I think you've come to the right place. Today, I'm very excited to talk about the topic that I know not a whole ton about. I've been in the Web3 space coming on about a decade. And so you can figure out how old that makes me. But this is a topic that I know the least about. So when Brian from my team suggested we do it, we're like, okay, well, we got to get like actual experts on this topic so that I can just pepper them with questions and we can figure out what this space is all about. So I'm very happy to have a couple of pretty important thinkers in this space on with me today. And so, the decentralized revolution, it's a lot of bit about like reshaping collaboration, governance, even funding, and how we think about ownership. All these different concepts come to the forefront when we start to talk about Web3 stuff. And DAOs, or decentralized anonymous organizations, have been this like topic that has come in waves in terms of its popularity. And with the big move into, autonomous, you're right. This big move into AI and sort of agentic frameworks and things like that, the topic is becoming quite important again, top of mind for a lot of thinkers. So now is a perfect time to discuss this. So I've got a couple of awesome guests with me. I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to hand it over to them. So to start with, we've got Greg, who is the CEO of Friends with Benefits. And he's been a cultural innovator and a community builder for quite a long time. We invited Greg here because I really want to kind of explore how FWB's unique network model kind of integrates culture and technology and governance to really like dial into sustaining an ecosystem or a community. And, so they've done this like membership relaunch and some token migration stuff and sort of technical details that make their approach quite interesting. So we want to talk, we're going to get Greg to kind of give us the details on that and the evolving role of cultural DAOs in particular in shaping how Web3 works. And then we've also got Connor from the Network Goods Institute. And so Connor is going to be our system designer who thinks about things like public goods funding and exploring different payment systems, thinking about collective reasoning and tools like a negotiation game to sort of reimagine how we solve problems collectively, and even concepts like decentralized equity and systems that sort of distribute power in fairly fair and opportunistic ways. And then we've got Ryan from DLP Labs, and I'm going to ask Ryan to kind of talk about things like personal assets, example would be like car data, and turning those into revenue streams, and sort of drawing on his past experience at Polygon and Coinbase, and just like discussing how decentralized systems can unlock new economic opportunities and sort of like empowerment opportunities. So that's the kind of, I'm going to lean on each of you with those topics. And to kick it off, because we've got a lot of people who maybe know more about data and AI than they do about DAOs, I'm going to turn it over to each of these fine gentlemen and ask them. DAOs kind of exist as this continuum from clubs with tokens all the way to like fully on-chain governance structures with like minimal human input, maybe even more often in the future. So with that in mind, what's your working definition of what a DAO is? And I'm going to turn it to you, Greg, to start with.
Thanks for having me. FWB we're entering into our fifth year. We started in September 2020. Trevor McFedries, who's the founder, he also created Little Michaela, sent out a tweet and was like, spinning up, he hacked together an ERC20 and was like, who wants to join a social club with capital? And that's kind of where we started, right? It was really a lot of people who came from really creative cultural backgrounds, really curious about how technology can improve and enhance their creative practices or their creative endeavors. And so what bound us together was a love for culture, and then this token, right? And this concept that like we all collectively owned the scene. I don't know how much people in here know about music scenes or art scenes, but generally the people who profited off of it or got famous off of it were not necessarily the people who started it. And so this kind of solved one of those things, like, all right, who was actually there? And you can see on chain who got the first tokens. So for me, the DAO has really just been about this like creative cultural organization. Now over time we've evolved, right? We were just a group chat with a bank account, a squad with a bank account, and then we took VC money in. Then we formalized. I'm actually part of like an entity that is owned by the DAO in the C-suite role. One of our members came up with like the UNA laws, if anyone's familiar with that, and now DUNA. And so we really evolved with the time throughout the definition of DAO. And now we're this collective of 5,500 international members that we do governance. There's a core team that runs it. We do an annual festival. We do member-led events. We actually just kicked off a huge partnership with World yesterday about a new type of hackathon. So I think for me, DAO is, and that idea came from a member. So for me, I guess with that little bit of framing is, DAO is this interesting organizational structure and more of a philosophy and a mindset for us of this kind of everyone is an owner. Anyone can get in touch with the leader of it. I actually started as a member and I'm now running it. I'm not one of the original co-founders or one of the co-creators. And so I think for us, it's a pretty dynamic structure where like anyone has a voice and can kind of shift and shape the direction if they like want to put forth the effort and the idea is good enough. And it's an interesting type of governance where it's like almost every day is a shareholder meeting, but everyone's an owner as well. And so being able to, evolve and adapt to that type of organization is kind of like what I think a DAO is, at least in January 2025. And if you ask me in a year or 2 years ago, it would have been probably a very different answer.
Nice. Yeah, that's perfect framing. Actually, the context is super valuable in order to understand where you're at now and where it's headed. And like some of those things you're talking about are like very reminiscent of like meritocracy sort of organization, right? Like if you want to contribute positively to this thing, you can actually work your way up to CEO because you're positively contributing to the goals of this organization. That's lovely. I like it. So we go with Connor. If you with that context in mind, and you can repeat what Greg says because these definitions are overlapping. But yeah, go for it. What's the sort of like, or your definition of DAO? And wait, before you do that, there is a difference between like, I want to hear about your working like on the ground definition versus like what a DAO could be, because we hear so much about that, from early talks from Vitalik to, like what DAOs could be. But what I'm particularly interested from you folks is like what they actually are.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that like we can pretty easily reach an intuition for why they should exist. These types of organizations should exist with sort of just two observations. The first is that we live in a world that's guided by capital. So people generally need to be paid as permission to go and do something. And they're not going to do it unless, it's the kind of thing that they can do while being able to still feed their family. And so capital is the way in which we guide the world, and then also like invest in different projects and opportunities. And that when we deploy money together, we can get a lot more done than if we just do it by ourselves. So if the four of us that are on this call are decided that we wanted to collaborate on deploying capital towards some project, then probably both through our network, but also just through the fact that we've like centralized all of this funding in one place, we could get a lot more done. And so I think that what we're asking, kind of like what a DAO invites us to ask, is the question of how should we decide how to deploy that capital? Like what rules of agreements should we follow in the deployment of the capital? And normally, in collectives of people who are deploying their money and energy have existed forever. It's like the oldest thing in the world. But what's new is that now you can sort of submit these rules in an immutable way. They cannot be changed. And then people can opt into living according to those rules. And also, by the way, we can test whether or not those rules work, because it's not always the case that any given governance system is very good. And so what might be exciting for people who are interested in the problem of governance, or the problem of like the meta crisis or the poly crisis, these like threats that we face collectively, is that DAOs also represent kind of the first opportunity for new forms of governance to come into existence and then to be tested. And so this is a forum for testing new kinds of governance in a really challenging environment, an environment that has lots of money in it. So I think that's what a DAO is for me, and why it's exciting and worth paying attention to.
Nice, love it. I mean, you could argue us, literally the four of us coming together to have this conversation and deciding to do that and taking time out of our day is exactly us coming together and deploying capital and getting more than the sum of its parts out of that interaction, because we're all going to learn a bunch. We're all going to share it with a bunch of other community members. It's like a micro.
I'm a little fond of drawing the line distinctly that if all of us had like pooled our actual capital, or like had shared upside in a token, that's what would really do it. But maybe we can do that right now. Maybe we can go launch a little pumped up fund token for reimagining collaboration with DAOs.
We totally should have set that up ahead of time. I think it would have pumped for a little while and then probably dropped to zero after we were done. But yeah, it's crazy times we live in. Awesome. Thank you very much. I like the sort of like actual raw working definition. I think that's going to resonate with a lot of folks. And then I could dive in there more, but I'm going to give Ryan a chance to give his working definition, and then we'll kind of move from there. So, Ryan,
yeah,
what do we got?
Yeah, I really like the definitions that Greg and Connor shared. By the way, I'm a member of FWB and attended Fest. And then I was sharing before that I hosted an event in Miami for FWB community members, and I had no idea who'd show up, and then a bunch of people showed up to a Cuban cafe in La Habana. So it's very cool. Recommend checking out and going to Fest. The way I think about DAOs is thinking about like what isn't a DAO, and then I get to my definition, and then I can maybe the next questions I'll talk about what we're building at DLP Labs and how this all connects to reclaiming data. So I used to work at Facebook, and content moderation at Facebook, what content gets taken off the platform versus what stays on the platform, is not voted on by the Facebook users. That's not a DAO. Here's another thing at Facebook that's not part of a DAO. How much money of the advertising revenue goes to creators on Instagram, or you can apply that same, not to pick on Facebook, let's do the same thing with TikTok. How much money goes to creators on TikTok is not governed by a DAO. Here's another example of what's not a DAO. Like if you were an early driver on Uber or Lyft, you don't have equity in those businesses. So those are not DAOs. So the jobs to be done, and then I'll get more into like the blockchain part of it. In an ideal world, it would be like you could vote on the like we use like technology, these web apps and services all day long. Like it would be cool if we would have the ability to like vote or influence the way they evolve, especially like the economics of them. But maybe it could be other things too. So that would be like literally within the world of the DAO. And I agree with what Connor was saying about there has to be some sort of like capital formation.